Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Born Political. It is election season, and what election season brings are folks that are trying to represent our community. There's different boards and commissions that everyone's running for. My guest tonight actually is one of to me, the most important boards that you could run for in any town, and it's the Board of Education. This gentleman is already on, and he's looking to serve another term. We're so lucky in this town to have the talent that we've had. And when we talk about Born Political and how we should know the background and what people are about when we expect them to serve us and vote for us, this Board of Education job is pretty big. I think we all agree that our kids are most important. And so tonight I'm very excited to introduce everybody. You probably know him. He's been in your mailbox for the last couple election cycles. But Matt Shulman, welcome to the show. It's great to have you. How you doing?
Great to be here.
Isn't it fun? It's a great studio. It's
fun, yeah. Absolutely.
It is. So Born Political, basically, we talk about people that serve our community and people in our community. I wanted to do the show because I wanted to get to know the people behind the titles, Board of Education, Town Council, or Park and Rec Director, whoever you were and however you served. And so Born Political is about who you are and where you were born. And I start out with, where were you born?
I was born in a small town in southern New York State you probably never heard of. Brooklyn.
No one.
Flatbush.
I heard. Do they have good pizza there? Is that
excellent pizza?
Okay.
Excellent pizza.
So born in Brooklyn.
Born in Brooklyn.
And raised in Brooklyn also?
Raised in Brooklyn until I was 18 when I went off to college. But let me backtrack just a second.
Yeah.
It's Born Political.
It is.
But what bothers me about the word political is that its meaning has been changed. It's considered to mean partisan, that you are one point of view or another point of view, and you've got to clash with one another. But the word comes from the Greek, and it means people. It means the ensemble, the getting together of people for the common good.
Yes.
And that's the frame of reference that I really love about our Board of Education. We've got some really conservative people with whom I often disagree on particular questions, and they often disagree with me. But we go out afterwards, we chat, we respect one another, we dispute, but we don't argue, and that's the best part of the Board of Education.
And you said you were going to go back a little, but you went all the way forward to where you are today.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your all the way down to your elementary school days.
Oh, PS 152.
PS 152. Look, the intimate of all schools. PS 152.
I had to walk two blocks to school and walk home for lunch. My mother would make me a grilled cheese sandwich with a slice of tomato on it. Then I'd walk back, a little 5 or 6 year old kid walking back to school. Unfortunately, that proximity to schools is a relic of the past.
Yeah.
Maybe in some small towns that still exists, but
Yeah.
not many people walk to school in Groton anymore.
No, I don't think anybody does. When you look at
Maybe
the
in
bus
northeast
schedule.
of Canopy. Maybe
That's a possibility, and I think it's an element that is missing. And I think as we get further away from what we, and everyone looks back at what we used to do. We do a lot of things differently. Some I think are for the better, some maybe not for the better. But in the end, you kind of form what education that kids get today, and it's based on what's happening around us. But so back to you. So you went to public school all the way. So what high school did you go to?
I went to public school for a couple of years, and then I went to a private school until 6th grade, and then I transferred into another private school. I come from a family that really tried to push people hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was appreciated by me and my brother, and sometimes it was less appreciated.
I think the appreciation comes with the further away you get from things.
Absolutely.
The lens. You're probably not happy when you're being forced to do things as a younger person.
Oh gosh.
So you and your brother, was that the whole family?
That was the whole
sibling-wise?
family, yeah.
And then your mom and dad, obviously.
My mom and dad.
Yep. And were they born in the U.S.?
They were born in the States.
Yeah.
Both of my parents were the first generation born in the States. Their
Yeah.
parents came from overseas, as a tremendous amount of our citizens in Groton have parents,
Yes.
and even the kids are born overseas.
Yeah.
Don't make a darn bit of difference because you're
No.
here now, and you live here now, and you work here now, and you struggle for our country.
Yeah. And what I see mostly, the way people's opinions are formed, a lot of it does come from the parents, whether it's work ethic or opinions or whatever it is. So what is it like? What would you say you got from your parents that drove you either towards your education or who you are today? Or
I think part of what drove me and a lot of people in my generation, people who are of a certain age,
Of a
down to
certain
people
age.
of a certain age, and people even in their 50s or so, the Depression, though I never experienced it, was omnipresent in our background My grandfather put in 16, 18 hours a day just to keep it together.
Yeah.
My father's father went bankrupt during the Depression and went into into a personal depression. My dad would come home from school and get him in the driveway. It's a narrow driveway to throw a ball up and back just to try to cheer up his dad. And it took him years to rebound from that. So that marked my parents' generation, and it marked us. Less so my kids.
Yeah, and I had the connection to my grandmother who lived to be 88 and passed away, probably 15 years ago now. But she remembered the things that they saved, what we would look at as being cheap or frugal or some things that we would throw away, she wouldn't. I have another grandma that would hold on to food with cans that were expired, and they would insist that, to look from the opinion of someone that had been through some very bad times, that you would never throw away something because of a date if you thought that if you smelled it and it seemed like it wasn't going to kill you.
Then maybe you wouldn't eat it.
Yeah, the kill test. As long as you weren't going to die from it, that it was going to be okay.
I lived in Vermont for 10 years, and they had an expression, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without.
There you go.
And that was in the late 60s and or early 70s. And that ethic, that New England Yankee ethic, is still present in a good share of Groton. Not all of it, but it's present in a good share of Groton.
Yeah. So you graduate from private school, high school.
64.
And then where'd you go to college for? What was
I started in Western Reserve University, in Cleveland, Ohio. Did very
Nice.
Cleveland. Oh God, the coldest place I've ever lived in my life. 8 degrees in Cleveland is worse than minus 40 in New York State. It's a nice town. Not knocking the town, but the weather was terrible. Didn't like the school, and took a leave of absence, which is a polite way for saying temporarily dropping out, and went into VISTA, the Volunteers in Service for America. It was part of the Great Society. It was where people could volunteer for 2 years, 1 or 2 years. We earned $60 a month.
Wow.
And I was sent to Omaha, Nebraska.
Does that still exist? That
It still
organization?
exists.
Oh,
It
does.
still exists. It's transformed. It has another name now that escapes me. Ever since I turned 30 last week, a lot escapes me.
A young 30.
A young 30. So I did a year there, worked for the Human Relations Board. And that work there directly connects to some of what we're doing here in Groton today, 50 years later. And I'm still in touch with my old boss, who's in his mid-90s now.
Wow.
Homer Floyd, bless his heart.
So that was an experience for. Did you do the full 2 years, or did?
I did a year in Omaha,
Yeah.
and then I went to Philadelphia and worked on a bail project, a personal recognizance project. You're presumed innocent, and you make bail, or you don't make bail. And if you don't make bail, you sit in jail for months waiting for the trial.
Yep.
And the purpose of bail is to ensure that you show up for the trial. It's not a measure of innocence or guilt, to ensure that you show up for the trial. And so there were poor people. They'd be booked in the Philadelphia prison system, and we would look at the booking sheets and see if they might conceivably be eligible for ROR, release on signature bond. And if they were possibly due, then they'd be interviewed, and I was one of the interviewers. And then because sometimes they'd fib to get out of jail. Can you imagine that?
I wouldn't.
Not to me, no.
It's not something I would do.
No, not at all. So then we'd have to go out into the community and verify length of residency, ties to the community. If they said they worked, do they really work? If they really worked, did they work the 10 years or 5 years that they said, or was it just 20 minutes? And then give it to the head of the agency, who no longer is with us. And he would go to court, present the stuff, and either receive the judge's approval or not for a $1 signature bond. And our rate of showing up was about 6 times that of the commercial bail bondsman.
Okay.
It was a great project. It helped save a lot of families, because if the breadwinner is out of the family for 2, 3, 4 months, the family goes down the tubes, becomes public assistance.
That's become a huge issue in a topic that's current now, and it has to do with the no bond, no bail. And really, it can be frustrating. Again, I think we watch all the news, and the news is in the business of reporting things that make people watch the news, whether it's someone doing bad things or what. You're not going to see. If you had a class reunion, say last year, and nobody got injured or hurt during the reunion, and everyone had a great time and made it home safely, they don't report that. And the same thing goes for someone that's out on bail. If they do something and it lands them back in trouble, everyone comes from the outside saying, "Look, nobody should get.
But let me stay on
you know.
bail because
Yeah.
I read the papers
Yep.
assiduously, and I don't understand what's meant by no bail, no bond, because I think it's probably, I'm guessing, probably more complicated than that. You don't open the doors to everybody to get out.
don't.
There's a type of control that's done that really, to me, has not been communicated in the newspapers and leaves the impression that it's everybody just gets a get out of jail free card, and it's not
Exactly.
that simple. It's not that
Nothing's
simple.
that simple.
Nothing's that simple.
It really isn't, and I think but that's where I think folks get nervous when that's really not the case. But a lot of people that, I mean, I went to prison after high school. That was one of my things that you may or may not know about me. It was I graduated, and that was my first act, that I was in trouble and I got in prison. I missed the Air Force because of it. But I remember being in there, and somebody said that they were offered to do 6 months in prison or come up with $500 and pay and be out. And they opted for the 6 months in prison, which ironically gave them a jail record and a jail number that carries you for your whole entire life, for $500. And I came from a family who wasn't rich, but certainly would have been able to come up with $500 to keep me out of prison for 6 months. And that's some of the, are you a criminal because you're poor, or are you a criminal because you're a criminal? And I think there's a big balance, and we have to kind of get to the balance.
The criminality is when you get convicted.
Yes.
And we're talking about the period before that's adjudicated.
Yes.
Which is kind of different. But maybe you'll consider finding somebody to invite here who is a lot more knowledgeable than I am.
Oh, I
and
will.
Can really answer the questions
Yeah.
that you have in your heart.
Yeah, yeah. So then you did you go back to college?
I went back to college.
Okay.
I still dislike Cleveland, and and I was driving in the country in the summer of '68, and we went through a town it said Putney on the sign. It's actually Putney, Vermont, about just north of Brattleboro, Vermont, southeastern Vermont, and it said Linus Pauling speaking at graduation. Well, Linus Pauling, for those of you who don't know who he is, was an incredible scientist who, I'm not sure if he won the Nobel or not. I think he did, but I don't want to make it as a statement of fact.
Yep.
And he was speaking at this college, so I said, I want to hear this guy talk. Because what I knew about him at the time was he was advocating an anti-war stance, anti-Vietnam War stance, and I wanted to hear who this person was. So I listened to him, and the speech was memorable, but what was more memorable for me was hear this guy who was taken seriously because of his work in science, so that when he went to a field of social concern, people paid attention to him because he'd earned his creds. And here I was, half dropped out of school and half not, and I said, I got to go back to school.
Yep.
So after the graduation was over, I went over to the president, tiny little college in Putney, Vermont, doesn't exist anymore. I said, I want to enroll. He said, why? I told him, he said, you're accepted.
Nice.
I was accepted. $1,800 a year. Can you imagine that for college?
Oh yeah. Well, back then that was probably pretty good. That was.
It was a bigger sum to earn.
Yep.
Anyway, so I graduated from there. I was the first trustee of a college in Vermont who was a student-elected trustee. And then after that, went on, let's see, that would be 70, went up to Canada and studied in Montreal for a year, and came back to work as a newspaper reporter in Springfield, Bellows Falls, Vermont. Did that for a few years. My wife and I, from my first marriage, lived in Saxton's River, Vermont, which is just west of Bellows Falls, just to help people situate it.
Yeah,
right?
yep.
You're sure.
I'm paying
You're
attention.
smiling. You're paying attention.
Yeah, I'm paying attention.
And then our marriage failed. At the time, I was pretty angry at her. She was pretty angry at me. And we're at the point now, 30 years, 40 years later, that we realized we both had a lot to do with. We were both immature in a lot of ways. We both had a lot to do with it. And we get along fine now in caring for our daughter and grandparents. But it was a big deal for a number of years. A big deal. It was tough for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Hope you haven't been through it.
I haven't.
Good.
So
don't change your
no,
plans.
I'm right now. Everything's going pretty well, okay. But
So then I went back to college.
Yeah, you went back.
In '76, I went to Cornell. I got accepted to a communication program, but not communication in a techie sense, and not in an IT sense, because IT didn't exist at all, but in a communication strategy sense. How do you design programs to get an intended message to an audience? And I applied it in an area that interested me, which was Africa. I was always interested in Africa. It's another story.
Yep.
And went and did my master's, did my doctoral work in West Africa, and met my wife in the Grand Marché de Ouagadougou, the big public market, outdoor market in Ouagadougou, which, as all of your listeners know, is the capital of what used to be Upper Volta and is now Burkina Faso. That helps a lot. It borders on Nigeria and
I know
Ghana.
Nigeria. There we go. You
Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, Benin. It's a
I did my
landlocked.
DNA. I'm 2%.
2%.
2% from
Togo?
from the Nigeria
Okay.
area. Just so you know.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
My
Thank
pleasure. So I met my wife there and stole one of the treasures of Europe. Some 5 members of her family are here right now visiting, which is phenomenal.
Awesome.
I got my degree, worked for the next 35 years for private enterprises, government, parastatals, worked for a number of years as Cornell Cooperative Extension's senior communication person. So different counties would have different needs, different cooperative extension counties, and they'd say, we have a problem in housing, or we have a problem with integrated pest management. And I chat with them, speak to the scientists at Cornell, they'd come up with a technical program, and I would design the educational piece so the program could be delivered in a way that the audience would understand and hopefully actually act upon.
Wow.
And worked in West Africa again, in Nigeria, on an agricultural project. Worked for FEMA in New York State, managed a pre-disaster mitigation program for FEMA.
Now, what school did you go to eliminate your Brooklyn accent? Because everybody that I know from Brooklyn has that, where I can identify it.
I can talk like I'm from Brooklyn, but my mother didn't want me to, and I ain't sufficiently vulgar, so what are you going to do about it?
There you go. So you got it. It's in there.
It's there. It's there in the DNA.
18 years of Brooklyn, and so the Vermont.
You can move the boy out of Brooklyn, but you can't move the Brooklyn out of the boy.
You just can't.
No.
So all this. I mean, I knew that you were the world traveler mostly, and it sounds like mostly to Africa. Were you in different countries too, or was it mostly?
I taught English as a foreign language for 3 years in France. Our son, Jean-Philippe, at 3 years of age said, nobody speaks French here, I'm not going to speak French. So my wife said to him, that's fine, when you're 8, we're going to France. And he didn't pay any attention, and when we were 8, we went to France for 3 years. He was so funny. The weekend we got there, they took him to play basketball with the local kids, and an American basketball player. And he would take the ball and dribble and stop and dribble again. Whistle would blow and they'd go like this. He had no idea what was going on. 3 weeks later, he was beginning to speak French, and he has an accent from the region of France that she's from.
Wow, that is awesome. So you come back. When did you come back? You were
Came back in '95. Built a new house on the farm. We owned a farm in Ithaca. We went into debt and bought an 87-acre farm.
Wow.
We avoided having the capital expense of equipment. We went on shares with another farmer.
Yeah.
And JP, Jean-Philippe, Aline, and I helped 2 other people build their house. And
Almost Amish-like. Ish.
Ish, like certain people said they were Jew-ish. No, nothing Amish about me. Except respect. Except respect. Except respect.
Yeah.
And I opened my own company, Community Communications of Central New York, and we published the Lansing Community News, which was a weekly tabloid newspaper, 5,500 copies that circulated through Lansing, Groton, New York, which is next to Lansing, New York, and a town in southern Cayuga County. So we did that, and when it came to retire, we moved down to North Carolina, where I formed another company, and I wrote grants and administered CDBG grants.
Yep. And then back here, and
we came back up here. Our son had an accident, and we decided to move back to be close to him. Came here with the understanding that people were not meeting secretly in their basements waiting for us to arrive. So how do you integrate yourself in a community? And there's only one way, and that's figure out something that you like and do it. And so my wife is involved in the beautification committee. She's the volunteer coordinator for Groton Community Meals. Was this your first foray into politics as far as Board of Ed, or did you do that anywhere else? It was the first foray into politics, with the one exception. I was elected as director of an ambulance corps
Okay.
I was an EMT and became director of an ambulance corps in New York State. But it's the first time I ever ran for office.
And when I met you, the first thing that came to my mind was how thorough you were with. When I asked, even when the show, I said, "Well, what do you want to talk about?" And I got the email, and there's a lot that you want to do in this town when it comes to the education part.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that are already in place. And I think a lot of times when you go there, it's really to enhance what's been done already, and then bring in the new ideas of what you think would work. And I think, why you're running. I know there's a.
We have a unique town in terms of
do.
education. Maybe not unique in the United States, but unique, maybe a little bit in Ledyard as well, but it's mainly here. Unique in the fact that 20% of our kids are military kids.
Yep.
And of those 20%, a third who start the school are not here at the end of the school year, and a third of our students who are here at the end of the school year were not here. And to help us deal and give these kids discern their needs and give them precisely what they need instead of putting them into a cookie cutter, we get a lot of support from the Department of Defense.
Yep.
And I don't think our citizens, by and large, some of them do, realize how much non-state, non-local tax money comes in that helps us build programs. The articulated intent is to help the military kids, but they're very clear that the money can be used to help all of our kids.
Yep.
And so this year, for example, for the first time, kids in the first, third, and fourth grade are beginning to learn French or Spanish. Wow. Instead of waiting until they're 11 or 12, they're beginning to learn a second language at 8 years of age. This is thanks to a new DODEA, Department of Defense educational grant that we got, in large part because we're a military service area.
Yep.
With military, some Native American, if you're a contractor with children, a contractor at EB, and you have children, they all count towards this percentage.
Okay.
And we barely make the 20% necessary to get this. There's a lot of funds that come in. Just got another grant in the last month for $1.25 million, $250,000 a year for 5 years to improve the teaching of ELA. We used to call that English.
Yep.
English language arts and math and science at the elementary school level, so that by the time they're getting into the middle school level, they're not just encountering something brand new. We can build the curriculum, say, when they graduate, we want them to have this skill, which means when they come into the 11th grade, they need to have this skill and this skill, which means when they come into the 10th grade, so we can build backwards and forwards to have a curriculum that really meets the kids' needs. And I got to tell you, I don't always agree with our superintendent, though we respect one another, don't always agree with her, but she is really amazing at being able to shake the tree.
I ran into her yesterday, because speaking of shaking the tree, we were there on behalf of Community Speaks Out last night at the RTM meeting, and what I think most people don't understand is the actual work that goes into being a superintendent. Like she's up at 6 o'clock in the morning and then goes in and does her thing in the office hours. But she was at that meeting and the last one to go at the meeting last night. Mm-hmm. So when I got to see her, it was about 9 o'clock, mm-hmm. and she was walking out of a meeting, and she started the day 13 hours before that. Mm-hmm. And the amount of work that actually goes into it is incredible. But it doesn't happen in a vacuum, and that's what I like about our Board of Education, and I like the diversity that we do have on the board. Is there something? I mean, you're going to be running. You want the position again. Is there a direction or something? Or do you think everything's going in a good direction? Or are there a couple things that you'd like to see changed?
Well, the nature of life is there are always challenges. There's nobody watching this today that doesn't have challenges. And as soon as you solve that challenge, what do you run into? A new challenge. So are there things that the board members, not speaking just for myself, I suspect each board member has some things he or she wants to see improved, which doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means it can get better. Yep. That's the attitude I want to say we want to bring. And I extend this we beyond political labels.
Yes.
Okay?
Absolutely.
I love that about our board. We have our D's and our R's behind our names, and there are some philosophical differences, but at the end of the day, it makes very little difference. It makes less difference than you'd ever imagine in our school district. Not talking about other places.
I think even talking to D's and R's, I've had everybody on the show, the gamut. Mm-hmm. Former Mayor Bruce Flax, who was a Republican when I served, and after speaking with him, the whole reason I started the show, because it's tiring to hear how people get attached to labels, and and how people don't like somebody because of something that they're associated with, but they don't know the person at all, not even a little bit. And right after the show with Bruce, I got off and people were texting me that weren't very fond of Bruce, that all of a sudden became pretty good fans of Bruce, saying, what a good guy. And in the end, I think if we can break that barrier, because we all want the same things, whether we want to admit it or not. You know, we want our kids to be safe, and we want our kids to be able to have access to education, be able to buy a home in our neighborhood. Those are all common, no matter if you're a Democrat or Republican.
So last time out, I sent a letter. Remember, I'm new to this community. I've only been here 9 years. I mean, that's my weak suit, which I acknowledge and recognize. I don't have the networks that many of the other people have. I wasn't raised in Groton, and those things are valuable. I bring other stuff that I hope offsets these lacks, but I made some phone calls to a number of churches and religious organizations. I said, would you invite me? And one of them that responded, and I went to a bunch of them, one of them that responded said, are you a Democrat or Republican? I said, I'm a Democrat. He said, why would we want you here?
Wow.
You know we're a conservative institution. I said, well, perhaps I'll get elected. Wouldn't you like to know you have a channel to communicate with? He said, yeah, come on over. And when I was there, they grilled me on a number of issues that were very important to them. And I don't think my answers satisfied them in terms of content, but I do think it satisfied them in terms that I was serious about listening and that they could count on access so that their ideas would be shared.
Wow.
And I think, so I would encourage any Republican to reach out to some real liberal organizations and speak to them. You know, take your punches and just be there.
As a politician myself, when I was involved, I found more. Sometimes you find more value hearing the other side's opinion than you will listening to the choir. You know, we get in our groups and we start. And again, I do believe in our base and what we stand for. But there are things to be learned from other people.
Absolutely.
No matter how you think. Well, sometimes their answer actually reflects what you would answer, and I think people get surprised by that.
But sometimes the circle comes around.
It does. It does. And speaking of around, we're almost at the end of our show.
It's been
I told you this was going to be fast.
So I told you here. So when I ran 2 years ago, I said there were 3 things I wanted to do. I wanted to restart our mentoring program, which got slaughtered by COVID. We went from 125 mentors to 2. We're back up to over 65 now.
Excellent.
The superintendent appointed some professional staff.
How would someone contact you guys?
Just call the district office and say you're interested in mentoring. They'll put you in touch with the right person right away.
Simple.
Very complicated. Just if you look it up on your phone. Financial literacy. Before the legislature approved financial literacy, a bunch of us brought it up to the board. We discussed it at length. It was referred to our curriculum committee. They've done research on what we do already. They're making their assessment. It'll come back to the board this year. It's a work in progress, but now that the state has mandated it, we're at least 8 months ahead of all the other districts because we started talking about it.
And you got about 8 seconds to get that last
Well,
line.
I'll let it go. Whether you vote for me or not, please come out. Please come out November 7th. It's only our town. They're only our kids, so let's take care of them.
What else could it mean? So I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to thank you for your service to the town thus far. I am a person that is rooting for you and in your corner and hope that you win this election. We do deserve the best for our kids. I believe Matthew Shulman is an example of being the best for our kids, and you have always a heart and mind for the community. And I don't say just the kids, because it's all the community. Every time I talk to you, I get this feeling that you're looking to push this agenda of community forward. And that's what I love about you, and that's why I know I'm supporting you. Hopefully you guys can support him. November 7th is coming up fast.
6 a.m. to 8 p.m.
6 a.m. to 8 p.m.
If you can't get there because you get ill in the last week or so.